weeks, months ago, Zach reached out to me and asked me if when I would be able to speak this spring, and this is one of the dates I was available. He says, that'll be perfect. He said, that's the last week on our series of lessons on dating and relationships. And I'm like, Zach, man, I haven't dated in over 40 years. You know, it's like, and back when I was dating, you just used a club, you hit them over the head and you drug them off by their hair, you know, kind of stuff. And so, I recognize the worst seasons of my life were dating seasons. They were the worst. I told my wife, I said, you know, there's just no way you can leave this world before me because I could not enter that world again. And I'm incompetent to be alone. So it's just like, I just have to die before she does. That's just all that happens there. So, but fortunately, when he gave me the curriculum, I recognized it's not just about dating and relationships. It's about how we make any big decision in our life. And that makes it a little bit easier for me. Because the last thing you want is for me to stand around tonight and talk about my dating relationship. Okay? Because I was a horrible dater. You know, when I was a freshman, sophomore, first half of my junior year, I didn't drive. My mom never drove. So my only criteria for a girlfriend those first 2.5 years was they had to drive. And so I dated only upperclassmen those first 2.5 years. And then I had about a year in there where I got my car, and then it was like I lost my criteria, so I just kind of wandered from one to the next, to the next, to the next, until my senior year. And we're on our way to a sectional basketball tournament. And because it was sectional, all the cheerleaders went with us. And so I got introduced to one of the freshman cheerleaders. And, you know, she didn't know anything about me at the time. And so I dated her all through high school. And then she came back at fall break of her freshman year of college and broke up with me. And then 3 months later, I started dating my wife. So you just got my entire dating history right there in that summary. Now, I look back on that, and it's just like, I knew early on this was not about a long-term relationship. I wasn't sure what it was about, but I knew it wasn't a long-term relationship. And then I got to that place where it's like, well, maybe this is a long-term relationship. But I found that even then, even if I wanted it to be a long-term relationship, that wasn't necessarily going to happen. And then, you know, Gloria and I got thrown together, and we were a mismatched pair. She was this incredible Christian girl. I was anything but a Christian guy. You know, there's a passage in Scripture that talks about being unequally yoked. Gloria disobeyed God once, I think, in her entire life, and that's when she dated me, kind of stuff. But God used that to set a course for my life that at the time I just had no clue what that was going to look like. So that whole idea of dating and relationships and stuff like that. And so, but really, whether it's dating or anything else, you know, how do we make decisions? Where do we go to make those decisions? And, you know, when you think about our relationships, sometimes, especially when we're trying out new things and we're trying to make things, we're really not sure how comfortable we are inviting other people into the process. I don't know about you. I mean, I was secure most of my life, not just my teenage years. I was insecure with that idea of any decision I made, and you know, I wanted to find a way to test the waters without putting myself out there where anybody could ridicule me. You know, and so, you know, I remember there were times where I wanted to do something, somebody else wanted to do something, they spoke up first, everybody laughed at them, so I made sure I laughed too and never said anything about what I wanted to do. Because how other people felt about that was huge for me. Anybody else in here willing to confess that they deal with issues of fear and insecurity? Okay. Now, I'd like to tell you that goes away at some point in time. It does not. You learn to manage it. It gets better as you get older. But we still have that. We still face those issues. You know, you get to your adult and you just, you know, how you keep score just changes a little bit. Yeah, you guys were talking about CIY and several years ago. Do you guys know Mark Moore? Has he ever taught any of your CIY things? Yeah, I knew you would know Mark. So Mark Moore right now is probably one of the premier teachers that I know in the country. But the last time I taught at CIY, there were more people in my class than Mark Moore's. Okay? I lived on that for months. It's like, well, yeah, but there were more people in my class than Mark Moore's, kind of stuff. And so that was, you just keep score differently when you become an adult and things like that. But just recognizing, that sometimes we don't know who we can let in to our relationships. And sometimes we're just not interested in having everybody's input. I can't imagine what it's like to live in the world that you guys live in right now, where our lives are lived out in social media kind of stuff. I couldn't imagine that back then. That idea of you put something out there and all of a sudden it's out and then everybody has a comment on it. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a thought. And looking at that, and it's like, gosh, do I really want everybody's input in that? Now, you may get to that place also where you're not really looking for anyone's input. You've made a decision for your life, and at some point in time, you may not even really care what everybody else thinks and what their ideas about things. And really, if you can get to that place where you're so confident in the decisions that you feel like you need to make, that you're not as interested in what other people think, and you're going to make that decision, in some ways you're in a better place, but that also sets you up for some potential failures along the way if you're not paying attention to that. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, it says, "For a lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." Now that's an important description of what it looks like in terms of how we're supposed to make decisions in our lives. Now, I have found that most of the time in my life, there are 1, 2, 3 people in my life that I would just trust with anything. I've developed those relationships, and most of the time, those people, they certainly weren't my best friends in high school. I'm not convinced that they ever helped me make any good decision when I was in high school. Now, granted, I want to acknowledge this because it's important, especially in the context of this room. My friends were not Christian. Okay, so they had no values, even if they wanted to, by which to make a decision. Nor did I. It wasn't a filter that we would use. But then just looking back at them, and some of them have become incredible men and women of God later in their lives, but that wasn't where we came from and stuff like that. And so looking at them and asking them to speak into my life was just not something I was really comfortable doing. But I also recognize that as I got older, there were people that I allowed to speak into my life, and they had a huge impact upon the decisions. And there are times that we need more people in that. See, if we're not willing to invite other people to speak into our lives at some point in time, if we're not willing to let other people speak into our lives at some point in time, we limit our ability to see life clearly. Because we all have blind spots. We all recognize that. We have things where we're looking at a situation, and maybe you're wired in such a way that all you can see is what could go wrong. All you can see. You hear about people, the glass half full, the glass half empty. I've always said it doesn't matter whether you think the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. All I know is the glass only has half as much water as it could have. And so that nature, but those people that look at it, and just like, oh, this is a great opportunity, and they just jump into things, and the other people that, will look at something and say, yeah, but this could go wrong, and this can go wrong, and this can go wrong. I happen to be one of those people. I call myself a pragmatist. I've heard another term about people like me, that they catastrophize things. Now, I'm the person that I would keep you from falling in a hole. But I would worry about that hole in ways that would keep us from moving anywhere in life significantly. And so that idea of being either a worst case scenario or even catastrophizing, or just, one of my best friends pastor that I worked with for 25 years, I used to call him the Happy Meal boy. Okay, because the way he saw the world was, there's always going to be a prize in there for him, and so it didn't matter about anything else. There was always going to be a prize, and so I called him the Happy Meal boy because it was always positive. Nothing ever bad was going to happen, and stuff like that. I think it's one of the reasons we work together so well. But if we limit who can speak into our life, we limit our perspectives. The other thing is, if we don't think about who's going to speak into our lives, we miss out on people who might make us better. Might make us better. And we have a term for that. Oftentimes it's called mentors. But it doesn't have to be someone at that level that's been there before us. It could be just somebody that has an insight that we lack. I look back on my life, and there were a handful of times where even if I didn't know it, I was faced with a fork in the road. And someone spoke into my life in such a way that it directed my path. And I share this illustration almost all the time, is that, my very first job was sacking groceries in a grocery store, kind of stuff. A neighborhood grocery store not too far from my house. I didn't want to be working. It was my sophomore year. It was the summer before my sophomore year of high school. I'd planned to spend the whole summer at the pool. My mom came home and she said, "I got you an interview at the grocery store." To do what? To get a job. I said, "I don't want a job. I'm going to the pool all summer." And she says, "Well, you want a car someday, you're going to have to buy it." And so I started working at a grocery store, but I did not want to be there. And so I went, I put on my shirt, I put on my tie, kind of stuff. I did what I was told, but I absolutely hated it every minute. One day I was coming back in, and the owner of the store stopped me on my way back from carrying out some groceries to a car. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, Mark," he said, this grocery store has been in my family for 3 generations. These people are like family to me. He said, and unless you can get to that place where you kind of see them as family, you're probably not going to be able to succeed in this environment. And I don't know why. It wasn't typical for me to accept criticism well. But on that day, in that moment, the way he said it or something about it touched me. And I heard that, and it began to change my attitude. I didn't want to disappoint him. But it did change, and I started looking at things differently. And the immediate result was I learned that I could make more in tips than I was making in my hourly wage. And then so I did that, and 2 years later, our night manager quit. I'm 17 years old, and he asked me if I would be the night manager of a grocery store. And I attribute that trajectory to a conversation that happened that could have been the end of my first job, and it wasn't, kind of stuff. And the fact is, that conversation has shaped my entire life because I see people through his lens, even to this day. They're not a means to an end. They're family. Everywhere I have been, everything I have done, I've been able to see people as family. And it has shaped me even up to when I got into ministry and how I did that. And so those mentors in our lives. The other thing is, without people who can make us better, we can miss out on what's best. We can miss out on opportunities, people that can point us in a direction. A great example for me was just ending up in Indianapolis. Okay, Indianapolis, was not on my radar. I'm from Illinois. In Illinois. So you guys tell jokes here about people in Kentucky, all right? Okay, in Illinois, we tell those jokes about people in Indiana. And so when I moved over here, it's like, hey, wait, you don't get to change the punchline. That's about Indiana people. But my point is, I was in Illinois, and my best friend came over here to restart a church that had started. It had some conflict. It split. It was going to probably go under if something didn't happen. And, he asked me to come over, and I'm like, man, there's no way. I said, that place it's a disaster. And, so finally, he convinced me to come over, and 25 years we spent working together, set the course for my life and ministry. All 3 of my girls were raised in Indianapolis. They grew up in that church. That church shaped them. It shaped our marriage and stuff like that. And so, just recognizing that, people that can speak into our lives and see something that we couldn't see in us that maybe really will truly change your trajectory. One of the things that happens is this idea, and I think it's going to be up here on the board. Oh, maybe it's not going to be up here, is that you only know what you know. Okay? Or the way I say it is, you don't know what you don't know. When I look at life, my perspective on things is based upon knowledge that I've accumulated up to that point. And there are always going to be flaws with that perspective, because I don't know what I don't know. You only know what you know. And so there may be an opportunity there. And so if we don't invite other people to speak into our lives, we may continue down a path that may not necessarily be bad. It may just not be the best life for us. And so we want to move into a place where we can live the very life. I don't think there's any of us in this room that ever want to live a life less than what it could be. Is there? I mean, does anybody in here want to be mediocre? Does anybody in here not to be worthwhile? Is anybody in here who doesn't want to be happy? Is there anybody in here who doesn't want to make a difference? And we all do. But in most cases, left to our own devices, we won't ever get to what we could be. And so the reality of needing to invite other people into our lives, people who can speak into us, speak into our journeys. And again, those forks in the road. Gloria and I got married. I had some issues. I had some addictions and stuff like that. And I had a conversion experience. I had a conversion experience in May. I was at a week of camp in June with 5th and 6th graders. I came forward at the end of the week of the camp. I didn't know why I came forward. My pastor's like, is God calling you into the ministry? And I answered yes. May, I've got addictions. September, I'm in Bible college. I show up in Bible college. I mean, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. They'd say, turn to this place, and I'd have to look at the index in the front of the Bible because I didn't know where those books were, kind of stuff. And I was so intimidated. I was 25 years old. Everybody in class with me was 18 or 17. They were all smart. They all knew the Bible forward and back. I'm sure every one of them could quote it from Genesis to Revelation, kind of stuff. At least that was my perspective. I was terrified I was going to be humiliated in class. So any opportunity I got to deflect, I did, whether that was ridicule or making a joke or something like that. I did, because I thought, well, if I can say something first, then I can't be ridiculed. And about 2 weeks into class, one of the professors, who's one of my best friends today, came up to me and he said, hey, can we get a cup of coffee? And I said, sure. I thought, well, he sees something in me, obviously. And so we go out to a cup of coffee and he said, hey, I've asked around, I know your story. I can't imagine how hard this is for you, making this transition to this culture and this environment. He said, but if you let me, I'd like to give you some advice. I said, okay. He said, well, Mark, there's a time to talk and there's a time to shut up. He said, this might be your time to shut up. He said, I'll make you a deal. He said, if you'll shut up, I promise you I will not call on you in class. I don't know how he knew that was my fear, but somehow he knew. And it shaped my life. I would not have made it through that very first class, that very first year, without that conversation. And so people coming into our lives and speaking into us. Now, I've had lots of mentors, lots of people that have spoken in my life. I'm getting to that season of life that many of the people who have spoken in my life over the last 20 to 25 years are no longer with us. And I miss them dearly. But I still remember things that they said, encouragement that they gave, times where they paused and asked me to rethink what I was thinking. And so one of the first things we have to do when we're thinking about inviting somebody in our life is we want to look for someone who can be objective. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I'm not saying anything about the friends that are sitting around you, but how many of your friends do you really think can be objective about what your needs are? Okay? Now, there are some. Don't get me wrong. There are very good friends. Sometimes they're older, sometimes they're younger. Like I said, I went to Bible college. I was a freshman in college at 25. My best friend was an 18-year-old whose dad was a seminary professor. He was brilliant kind of stuff. I mean, he taught me about prayer. He taught me about fasting. Here I was, a married guy, and he was teaching me how to live my life, and he was a single guy, had never been outside the dorm kind of stuff. But those people are rare. Sometimes it's that idea of looking out for those people, and because you want to think about someone who can be objective, someone who has no motive outside of just giving you the very best advice possible. And sometimes family and friends can't give that advice. And I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just not in their nature necessarily to think outside of their own circumstances for you. Because they're going to run everything that they might offer you through their own lens and their own filter. And so you need sometimes people in your life who have had experience that are beyond what you have as shared experiences. And looking for those kind of people. You want to find someone who's already been there. Okay? Now, not necessarily somebody who's, you're here. You don't necessarily need somebody who's out here looking back. Because when I look back, if I look back too far, everything I remember back there has been sterilized. Okay? Or it's been embellished. Okay? I've downplayed my weaknesses and my failure, and I've upplayed my successes as I look back on that. But someone who's maybe here, who remembers going through that season of life, who can speak into it, who can share with you and say, hey, yeah, I understand what you're thinking right now, but think about this. Not someone who can tell you what to do, but somebody that can help you process those major decisions in your life. And that could be everything from dating to college to a career, whatever the case may be. But thinking about those people. And one of the things that you can do is just pray. And then at some point in time, unless God sends you somebody, and he does do that occasionally, he'll put people in our path that are life-shaping for us. And again, they could be peers, or they could be people serving around us, coaches, counselors, whatever the case may be. They could be pastors, people working in the youth ministry, whatever the case may be. Sometimes our parents at seasons of life can be really helpful. But asking people, would you be intentional about speaking into my life? Can you be there for me when I need you? And it's not going to be all the thing. We're not necessarily asking them to be our best friend, but knowing that there's somebody there that I can turn to and I can trust their opinions. Because if we don't, we could miss out on the potential to be the best version of ourselves. What we don't want to do is look back with regrets. And if I chose right instead of left, my life would turn out differently. And God can redeem those. I am a living testimony that there were times in my life where I turned left and I should have turned right. And God, for whatever reason, in his infinite mercy, redeemed some of those. But there are things about my life that I look back on. It's like, if I'd have turned right here instead of left, there are things I wouldn't be facing right now, things I wouldn't be dealing with, regrets that I wouldn't have, and maybe joys that I would have if I went through that. So we just want to encourage you as we kind of come to the end of this to recognize you can't do this by yourself. And your peers and whatever you might get from social media isn't going to necessarily always be your best resource. But you definitely need to surround yourself with people who are the kind of people that you want to be, that you want to become. Because you're more likely to become like them if you're surrounded by them.